lost technologies that science can't replicate. There are places in this world where the stones still remember, where they hold the warmth of hands that shaped them, not with chisels and hammers, but with something older. Something forgotten. Where walls rise with no mortar to bind them. Each stone carved so precisely that a blade of grass cannot slip between. Where massive slabs heavier than locomotives sit perched atop hills, aligned with the stars, unmoved. By time, by rain, by war. Science stands in front of them like a child at the foot of a sleeping giant, notebook in hand, puzzled and small. The textbooks say we are the peak of human achievement. But the stones, they say otherwise. It was the quiet hours between midnight and dawn when stories like these like to find their way into wandering minds. And so it was that I, unable to sleep, found myself reaching for an old journal, a collection of travels and whispers, notes from places where the past still breathed. The first page opened to Baalbek, Lebanon. Not the tourist gloss, not the filtered photos, but the raw truth of stone that science still trembles before. Baalbek, the stone that waits. They call it the stone of the pregnant woman, but she is no myth. She is real. 1,000 tons of limestone, carved, lifted, moved. But no one knows how. Not the archaeologists who walk in circles, not the engineers who run the numbers and frown, not the historians who scratch margins with guesses. What we know is this: she was cut from the quarry with such elegance, her base still smooth, untouched by modern saws. And she was meant to be moved to a platform a few hundred feet away, stacked with other impossible stones, but she was never taken. Or maybe she was left behind. Some say the machines failed. Some say the knowledge vanished. Some whisper it was not machines at all but sound, frequency, a language spoken not with mouths, but with vibration. In the silence of Baalbek, the stone still hums. Not a sound you can record, but something you feel in your bones. The question of the ancients. You see, this story is not just about lost stonework. It's about a question we don't want to ask. What if we are not the first peak of civilization? What if we are a recovery, not a beginning? Like a person waking after amnesia, living a full life, not realizing this is not their first. There are footprints under our cities, bones beneath our temples, and technologies that laugh silently at our pride. Baalbek is not alone. Let me take you now to the temples of India, where iron does not rust, where pillars defy decay. The iron pillar of Delhi, the metal that refused to die 6 meters tall, more than 1,600 years old, standing in the open air through storms, heat, and human touch. And yet, it has never rusted. Not fully. Not even close. Modern metallurgy can replicate similar alloys, but only in controlled conditions, with high-tech labs and specific limitations. Yet this pillar, forged in an era without industrial technology, still stands as a silent insult to our assumptions. The secret? Some claim it's the high phosphorus content. Others argue it's an accident, a lucky formula. But the oldest texts speak of something different, of Agni, the fire god, whispered into the forge, of mantras sung while the metal was hot, aligning atoms with intention, of fire not just as heat, but as spirit. Can metal hold memory? Can sound change substance? Or are we just afraid to admit we've lost more than we know? The silence between our discoveries, what makes something lost, is not that it was never real, but that we no longer remember how to find it. And worse, we stop asking. We mock those who search, but in the quiet, before sleep, something ancient still calls. It's in the way certain ruins resist being explained, in how our tools break trying to replicate what was once done with ease, in the way some old maps show lands that no longer exist, drowned, burned, or swallowed by time. Our ancestors weren't stupid. They weren't primitive. They were simply before us. And maybe, in some ways, beyond us. The Nazca lines, messages you can only see from the sky. Let me take you to Peru, to a desert plateau where the earth was carved not with tools, but with vision. Lines that stretch for miles. Figures hundreds of meters long, spiders, hummingbirds, monkeys, perfectly proportioned, visible only from above. Created centuries before humans had the means to fly. Who were they for? Why were they made? And how did they know what could only be seen from the heavens? Theories abound. Alien visitors, flight via forgotten balloons, or something even stranger, consciousness that could leave the body. To modern science, they are geoglyphs. To ancient memory, they are prayers written on the skin of the earth, the blueprint of forgotten genius. Do you feel it? That pull in your chest when something doesn't add up, when a mystery isn't just unsolved, but deliberately buried. There's a reason we don't teach these things in schools. Not because they're false, but because they unravel the neat fabric we've stitched together. They whisper, there was more. There was something else. And maybe, just maybe, it's still inside us. Waiting, dreaming, remembering. In the stillness of the night I closed the journal. Not because I was finished, but because I wasn't ready. Each story was a doorway. Each unanswered question, a soft breath from the past. And as I lay back on my pillow, the room no longer felt so modern. The light from the moon slipped through my curtains, and for a moment, I could swear I heard something beneath the silence. A chant, a rhythm, a language not of words but of vibration. The kind of sound that moves stone, that folds metal, that remembers when we could speak to the sky and it answered. Sleep took me slowly, not like a descent, but like a rising, as if the ruins were not beneath us, but above, waiting for us to wake. The glass that saw what eyes couldn't. They say that in some ruins, what's most mysterious is not what's missing, but what shouldn't be there, like an object too perfect for its time, or a material so advanced it makes the timeline crack. That's how I first heard about the lens of Nimrod, and how the night, already quiet, grew still enough to listen. The crystal eye of Assyria, discovered in 1850 by Sir Austen Henry Layard. The tiny piece of crystal was buried beneath the dust of Nimrod, ancient capital of Assyria. It didn't look like much, just a polished oval of rock crystal, slightly convex. But then the light hit it, and the past blinked open. Held at just the right angle, it magnified objects tenfold. Sharper than a magnifying glass. More precise than any tool the 8th century BC was supposed to possess. Scientists called it decorative. A fancy trinket, a polished bauble. But what if it wasn't? What if that lens, 3,000 years old, wasn't just a curiosity? What if it was used to engrave miniature details, to study stars, to guide hands with the kind of precision that modern microcarving still struggles to achieve? And what if it was one of many? The eyes of the forgotten builders imagine a civilization that knew how to see what was invisible to others. Not metaphorically, literally. To look at stone and see its grain, to see energy lines along walls and align structures, not by guess, but by feel. Ancient cultures spoke often of the third eye, a center of vision not bound by biology, a seeing that happened with the soul. Perhaps the lens of Nimrod was a bridge, a tool to focus not just sight but intention, to see deeper, to build smarter, to remember what we've forgotten. The temple that echoed stars. Let me take you now to Egypt. Not to the pyramids, though we'll return to them, but to something hidden in plain sight. The Dendra temple complex. Inside its chambers, there are carvings that show something strange. Figures holding bulb-shaped objects with wires and stems. Devices that look suspiciously like electric lamps. Skeptics laugh. They say it's myth, symbolism, but the walls tell a different story. They show connections, coils, power lines, even what looks like a power source, a jed pillar beneath the device. And on ceilings, astronomical diagrams so precise, They map out stars with a clarity NASA might admire. How? The batteries buried in clay of ancient Egypt was symbolic. Then ancient Mesopotamia was practical. In 1938, in modern-day Iraq, a set of clay jars was uncovered. Inside, a copper cylinder, an iron rod, and traces of acid. A battery. 2,000 years before Volta. They say it couldn't have powered much. A small jolt at best. But that misses the point. They weren't trying to light cities. They were playing with forces, testing what materials could do. Starting a fire not of flame, but of understanding. What if they succeeded? What if someone took that knowledge, ran with it, and built machines that hummed with secrets? The machines that disappeared in a museum in Cairo. There once sat a strange object, a bird-shaped artifact. But not any bird. Its wings were aerodynamic, its tail vertical, its body hollow. To modern engineers, it looked like a model glider. Some tried to replicate it. When launched with the right trajectory, it flew gracefully, silently. Was it a toy, a prototype, or a memory of a time when the skies were not empty? The flight of ancient dreams in India. Ancient texts speak boldly of Vimana's flying chariots, described in startling detail. They mention metals unknown to us, Mercury engines, and even aerial battles. Fantasy? Perhaps, but what if we're projecting our amnesia onto their memory? There are carvings on pillars, on scrolls, showing what look like crafts with wings and wheels, and descriptions of vertical ascent, precise control, hovering still in air. All from thousands of years ago. What if the dream of flight didn't begin with the Wright brothers, but simply returned to us? The sound that lifted stone, one of the most persistent whispers in ancient lore, is that of levitation by sound. In Tibet, monks are said to have used drums and horns, arranged in specific geometric formations, to lift massive stones. An observer in the 1930s wrote that he watched a team of monks, with nothing but musical instruments, raise a stone slab up a cliffside without touching it. Impossible? Yes, but perhaps that's only because we measure possibility with a ruler built in ignorance. Modern physics already tells us sound can move matter, can rearrange particles, can break glass. What if sound could do more? What if ancient temples weren't just spiritual chambers, but acoustic machines? Designed to resonate, to tune the body and space into harmony, to shift weight, to bend reality. The harmonic codes some rooms hum, not because of machinery, but because they were built to ancient Malta. Chichen Itza, the hypogeum, whisper in one corner and a voice dances on the walls. Sing the right note and the floor beneath your feet seems to respond. These were not accidents. These were designs. Architects who understood that space was not static, that walls could echo memory. That vibration was a language the world still spoke, if only we'd remember how to listen. The atlas of the impossible. And then there are the maps, like the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513, yet showing Antarctica without ice. A continent supposedly undiscovered until 1820, and certainly never mapped in its pre-glacial state. The coastline on the map matches modern scans beneath the ice cap perfectly. How? The creator claimed it was compiled from much older charts, ancient sea maps, traced and copied through ages. But who made those originals? Who sailed that far, that deep, before compass and sextant? The silence of proof. When something cannot be explained, it is often ignored. When something does not fit the story, we pretend it does not belong. But the night is more honest than the day. It asks the questions others won't. It wonders aloud. What else is buried? What else have we dismissed? What did we once know that we now fear to remember? As I closed the second chapter of the journal, I felt no answers. But I felt something more valuable, a tremor of possibility, a vibration deep in the chest, like the echo of a song you forgot you loved. The world may no longer build like this. But perhaps the memory still lives in us, waiting to rise again. The healing that shouldn't have worked. Before there were hospitals, there were temples. Before scalpels and anesthesia, there were chants, hands, and something else. The bones buried beneath ancient earth tell a different story than our textbooks. They show cuts too precise for the tools we believe existed. They show survival after operations that should have been fatal. This is not speculation. This is archaeology. And it begins with the most delicate of operations. Trepanation. The skull. That survived the blade in Peru, in the high Andes. Dozens of skulls have been unearthed with round holes cleanly bored through the bone, sometimes more than one. At first, scientists thought they were signs of trauma. But there was something strange. The bone had regrown. The patient had survived. In some cases, for years. Trepanation is brain surgery. It's dangerous even now. It involves removing a portion of the skull carefully, cleanly, and without killing the person. And yet, ancient cultures from Peru, Africa, and Europe practiced it successfully. No scalpels, no antibiotics, no hospitals. Just something we no longer remember. The temple of the body in Egypt. Beneath the sands of Saqqara lies a forgotten clue. The temple of Kam-Umbu is often spoken of for its symmetry. But in its carvings lies something more curious. On its walls are surgical instruments, scalpels, forceps, clamps. All carved with such detail that modern surgeons recognize them instantly. Were these symbolic, or were they used? Even more strangely, some temples have diagrams of the nervous system, the brain, the spinal cord, acupuncture points. How did they know? Modern science mapped these systems in the last few centuries. But the carvings are thousands of years old, and they are accurate. Medicine that remembered the soul. In many ancient systems, healing was never just physical. Illness was seen as a disharmony between body, mind, and the invisible threads that bound them. The Chinese called it qi, the Indians prana, the Greeks pneuma. In these systems, healers were not mechanics. They were harmonizers. They used sound, movement, touch, breath, sometimes herbs, but more often resonance. Modern medicine laughs at this. But quantum biology is starting to whisper back that maybe cells respond to frequency, that maybe emotions have signatures, that maybe memory lives not just in the brain, but in every part of the body, and maybe the ancients already knew. The machines that weren't mechanical. In the writings of Hieron of Alexandria, we find descriptions of devices powered by steam and pressure. Centuries before the industrial age, he designed automatic doors, vending machines, even a primitive engine. But he was considered a novelty, a magician, not an engineer. What if Hieron was not inventing alone? What if he was remembering? What if the true machines of old weren't gears and bolts, but principles? Ideas turned into motion using the natural forces of the world. Some claim that in ancient temples, the statues could move. That water pressure or magnetic alignment made them speak, shift, or pour. Not magic, not lies, just forgotten engineering. The batteries of the body. Ancient healers sometimes spoke of the body as a conductor. They mapped energy points, what we call chakras, meridians, or nadis. They said each point was not just symbolic but functional. Modern science has started to find strange truths. Clusters of nerves, glands that regulate hormones, electromagnetic fields generated by the heart. We're only just beginning to understand how the body creates electricity, how the brain runs on voltage, how the heart emits measurable frequencies the ancients didn't measure. They felt. And sometimes that made them more precise. The geometry of healing. In some ruins, architecture wasn't just for beauty. It was medicine. Domes that amplified certain frequencies, rooms with golden ratios that calmed the nervous system, altars aligned with celestial events, syncing body with cosmos. In ancient Greece, Asclepian temples were healing sanctuaries. People slept inside, receiving dreams and visions. They woke feeling better. Modern hospitals have fluorescent lights and straight lines. But in Asclepian temples, healing was curved, sonic, and often dream-induced. What changed? The herbs that spoke in every ancient culture. Plants were teachers, not ingredients. Shamans spoke to them, not metaphorically but literally. They said plants had songs, that the right melody could unlock the spirit of a leaf, a root, a flower. And strangely, this wasn't random. Ayahuasca, for example, is made from two plants that must be combined precisely to have effect. Alone, they do nothing. Together, they open the mind. The odds of discovering this by chance are astronomical. Yet the shamans say, the plants told us. How do we dismiss this as myth? But maybe the myth is all that's left of a technology of consciousness, one we traded for pills. When healing was remembering, the deeper I went into the journal, the more I realized ancient medicine wasn't about fighting the body. It was about listening to it. It didn't fear death. It didn't avoid pain. It understood that illness was a messenger, one that modern systems try to silence too soon. The ancients didn't just treat symptoms. They treated stories, wounds of the spirit that bled into the flesh. They asked, where did your sorrow begin? What dream broke and stayed broken? And sometimes, they simply sang over the bones until they remembered how to knit themselves whole. Again, a different kind of doctor. The night had grown heavy again. I closed the book, but I didn't feel sleepy. I felt full, like I'd eaten a meal my soul had forgotten it needed. Somewhere out there, perhaps, under jungle or desert or sea, there are scrolls and carvings and whispers waiting. But maybe, the real memory is inside us, waiting for silence, waiting for stillness, waiting for someone to ask, what did we know before we forgot how to measure it? The stars that were calculated by hand. There is something about the night sky that humbles even the most advanced minds. And yet, our ancestors did not simply gaze at the stars in wonder. They measured them, mapped them, built entire cities in alignment with them, and they did it with a level of precision that still causes experts to pause and blink. The deeper I went into the journal, the more I realized the lost technologies of the past were not always physical. Some were mathematical, some were cosmological, some were carved into time itself. The mechanism that shouldn't exist. In 1901, a group of sponge divers discovered a rusted mass off the coast of the Greek island, and Hera. It looked like a chunk of coral-covered debris, but inside, gears, cogs, dials, dozens of them, interlocking, calibrated, tiny beyond belief. It became known as the Antikythera mechanism. And it changed everything. Dated to around 100 BCE, it is essentially an analog computer used to predict planetary positions, eclipses, even the timing of the Olympic Games. Some called it an outlier, a miracle, a fluke. But what if it wasn't? What if it was a fragment of a wider knowledge, one that knew how to read the heavens with gears and hands? The builders of light across the world. Structures rise in silence, aligned not with roads or rivers, but with the sky. The Great Pyramid of Giza aligns perfectly with true north. Stonehenge marks the solstices. Machu Picchu catches the exact point of sunrise during the winter solstice. Angkor Wat aligns with the spring equinox and Venus cycles. How did these people, without satellites, telescopes, or calculators, build monuments with astronomical precision? One answer: they weren't just building monuments. They were building calendars, cosmic mirrors, timekeepers, and they weren't guessing. The mathematics of the ancients in India. Vedic texts speak of the yugas, massive cycles of time spanning thousands and millions of years. In Babylon, priests recorded celestial movements with a system so advanced they could predict eclipses centuries in advance. The Maya developed a calendar so accurate Its error margin is smaller than the Gregorian calendar we use today, dot and all. This without modern math, dot, or so we think. But in the ruins of Nalanda, Babylon, and Tikal, fragments remain of equations, of calculations, of time carved in stone, not primitive. Not lucky, deliberate, elegant, knowing dot when time was circular. One of the strangest differences between ancient time and modern time is not just in numbers, but in shape. Dot we see time as linear, a straight arrow, forward only, but the ancients saw time as circular, spiraling, returning, rhythmic. Dot their calendars weren't just about days and months. They were about energies, phases, windows, moments when healing was easier, when planting would thrive, when silence meant transformation. This wasn't superstition. It was a kind of science, but one we don't yet have the language for. The cities that remembered the sky. There are cities built in the shape of constellations. Teotihuacan, Mexico, aligned with Orion's belt. The pyramids of Giza also aligned with Orion. The Hopi mesas in Arizona, again, Orion. Coincidence or memory? Did these civilizations, separated by oceans and eras, remember something about that particular cluster of stars? A myth? A truth? In the Dogon tribe of Mali, Africa, stories were passed down of a star Sirius B, invisible to the naked eye. They described its density, its orbit, its companion. They knew it long before modern telescopes confirmed it. How? They say the Namo beings from that star taught them. Science laughs. But the Dogon knowledge remains. And perhaps the stars remember who once listened. The language of light and shadow in some temples. Architecture wasn't just spiritual, it was solar. At Chichen Itza, during the equinox, the shadow of a serpent slithers down the temple stairs. At Abu Simbel, light enters a dark chamber only twice a year, illuminating statues of gods in sequence. These alignments are not random. They require centuries of observation, mathematical models. Patience we no longer have. We build quickly. They built for forever. And in that forever, they left messages, coordinates, rhythms, not just to mark seasons, but to connect us to something bigger. The temples that breathe time in Cambodia, India, and Indonesia. There are temples with thousands of carvings, each one tied to celestial events. The Borobudur Temple, for instance, is designed as a mandala, a physical journey through enlightenment mapped in stone. Each level represents a different plane of reality. Each statue faces a specific direction. Each step, a movement through inner and cosmic time. This is not architecture. This is technology of the soul, built not to serve gods, but to awaken humans. And we've forgotten how to walk these paths. Silence of the night sky. I set the journal down, not because the stories had ended, but because my heart was too full. Outside, the stars blinked softly, millions of lights singing quietly, not one of them out of place, not one of them accidental. I realized then, the ancients didn't worship the stars. They collaborated with them. They knew when to act, when to rest, when to plant, when to die, not by clocks, but by constellations. In that kind of rhythm, there is peace. In that kind of knowing, there is power. And though our world today is loud and fast and forgetful, the sky still remembers, and maybe it's waiting for us to look up and remember too. The energy that floated in the air. There was once a time when power didn't need wires, when energy didn't come from fuel, when the very air buzzed with a quiet force waiting to be gathered, shaped, used. Or so the whispers say. We often imagine our ancestors kneeling in candlelight, huddled in darkness, waiting for our modern world to bring them light. But what if some of them had already mastered it in ways we can't reproduce, ways we've chosen to forget? The towers that hummed without wires. Most people know the name Nikola Tesla. Fewer know of Wardenclyffe Tower, his unfinished dream. Built in 1901 on Long Island. The tower wasn't just a transmitter. It was meant to be the conductor of free Wireless energy drawn from the very ionosphere. He believed the Earth itself was a resonant conductor. That energy could be broadcast wirelessly across oceans, lighting homes, running machines, clean, limitless, and free, but the funding dried up. The tower was dismantled, and the idea buried. But what if it wasn't Tesla's idea alone? What if he was remembering the forgotten temples of energy in India? The temple of Kailasus, carved entirely out of a single mountain. Not built, revealed. As if the stone had been peeled away with some precision we don't understand. Its spires rise like antennas. Its chambers echo in peculiar ways. Some believe the temple isn't just spiritual, it's resonant dot like a tuning fork. Or a battery, similar. Questions arise in Angkor Wat and the Great Pyramid of Giza. Their central chambers contain no soot, no burn marks, no signs of torches, and yet they were lit. How? Some researchers suggest they weren't lit by flame at all, but by electromagnetic resonance, or light conducted through crystalline materials. Of course, this is heresy to academic orthodoxy. But the stones don't care. They remember what was once possible. The obelisks that captured the sky throughout Egypt stand obelisks tall, tapered monuments, often capped with gold or electrum. They were not just markers. They were conduits. Or so say some researchers, placed on ley lines, near rivers, near temples. They may have conducted subtle atmospheric energy collected from the earth and stars. Were they decorative? Possibly. But their material, placement, and precision suggests something more. A grid, a network, a kind of ancient circuitry, and the temples around them? Not houses of worship, but transformers. Not machines in the mechanical sense, but structures that channeled invisible forces. The pyramids were not tombs, despite what's taught in schools. No mummy was ever found inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. Not one. No inscriptions. No sarcophagus. Nothing to suggest it was ever meant to house a corpse. But what it does contain is mystery. The king's chamber is made of granite full of quartz, which reacts to pressure and vibration. The shafts point precisely to Orion and Sirius. The entire pyramid sits atop a magnetic anomaly. Some believe it was a power plant, a harmonic generator, a device that drew energy from the Earth's natural vibration. Too wild to consider? Then why does water beneath it still produce faint electrical activity? Why does its shape concentrate energy? Why does standing inside change your heart rhythm? Maybe we're not asking the right questions. The mirrors that caught the sun in the Baghdad Museum, before it was looted, there were fragments of parabolic mirrors made of polished bronze. In China, India, and Greece, similar devices were said to light fires from afar. Legends tell of Archimedes burning ships with mirrors. A fantasy? Yet modern tests suggest it's theoretically possible. But what if mirrors were not just weapons? What if they focused healing light? What if they amplified signals or tuned resonance? What if they were optical computers, reflecting not just light, but intention? We look at mirrors as vanity, but to the ancients, they may have been gateways, structures that breathe energy. In the Peruvian highlands, certain Inca terraces and walls are built with interlocking stones, so tight a blade cannot pass between. But that's not all. Some researchers noticed something strange. The rocks seemed to vibrate in the presence of sound, not audibly, but measurably. Like a tuned circuit. As if the stone itself responds, amplifying, conducting. It's been called stone softening. But perhaps it's not soft at all. Perhaps the ancients knew how to align molecules using frequency, and built entire cities as vibrational matrices. We call them ruins. But maybe they're just waiting to be reactivated. The energy of breath and thought. Ancient yogis, Taoists, and shamans didn't speak of energy casually. They lived it. They described ki, prana, orgone, tummo forces that moved through the body, that could heat the flesh, move objects, even alter reality. To us, these are metaphors. But to them, they were instructions. Some could warm their bodies in snow-covered caves. Some could sit without food for days. Some could move pain with a breath. Are these legends? Or are we the ones too numb to feel the currents? What if the human body was the original antenna? The first energy tower? The memory in the air, the journals. Pages whispered more now, as if they were not made of paper, but of static, electric. Alive, I read of temples that rang like bells, of stones that glowed in the dark, of healers who could touch skin and make fever vanish. And again and again. One truth: the air was never empty. It is full of frequencies, of charge, of memory, of energy we once danced with, sang to, built with. And now we fill it with noise, Wi-Fi, radiation, endless signal. But beneath it all, the original hum remains. Waiting. In the quiet, it still hums. I placed the journal down again, but I could feel the tingling, not in my hands, in the space between my skin and the air. As if something had leaned closer, a memory, a breath, a current. I turned off the lights, laid still, and in that stillness I realized we are not missing tools. We are missing attunement. The ancients weren't just builders. They were listeners. And their greatest invention was their relationship with the world. The maps that shouldn't exist. Some truths are not hidden in darkness. They're left in plain sight because no one believes they can be real. That's how I first felt when I saw it. A map, older than the idea of flight, showing places no sailor should have seen. Shorelines buried beneath ice. Continents before they sank. Curves of the world only satellites could confirm. The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. On gazelle skin parchment, crisp, accurate, impossible. A glimpse too clear. The Piri Reis map shows the western coast of Africa and the eastern coast of South America in uncanny precision. It also shows something far more unsettling: Antarctica. Not the Antarctica we know. Not the frozen wasteland buried in miles of ice. It shows Antarctica's landmass as if viewed when it was free of ice. Coastlines, mountain ranges, river systems. The kind of topography modern science didn't discover. Until seismic sonar mapping in the 1950s. How could someone in the 1500s know this? Piri Reis himself said the map was a compilation drawn using even older source maps. How old? He never said. But the ocean doesn't lie. The memory of lost explorers imagined this. A civilization, long before the great empires, before Rome, before Egypt, traveled the oceans. Not on rafts, not on guesswork, but with navigation tools we can't reproduce today. They mapped coastlines, cataloged stars, built libraries of knowledge etched into copper, stone, or memory. Then the sea rose, the earth shook, the fire came, and the world forgot, but not completely. Fragments survived, carried by the hands of survivors, preserved in myths, legends, and eventually rediscovered by those like Piri Reis. The depths that shouldn't be there in Japan, just off the coast of Yonaguni. Something stirs beneath the waves. Massive steps, flat terraces, right angles, pathways cut through stone. Some say it's natural, but few rocks form 90-degree corners by accident. This is the Yonaguni Monument, a submerged megalithic site that, if artificial, would date back over 10,000 years. That's older than the pyramids, older than agriculture, older than memory. And it's not alone. Off the coast of India, in Dwarka, ruins stretch beneath the water pillars, walls, courtyards. How old? Some estimate 9,000 years. Science hesitates. Because if they're right, it means we've misunderstood everything about human history. The compass that doesn't spin in the ancient world. The compass was more than a tool. It was a story. The Chinese used lodestones thousands of years ago, magnetized rocks that pointed north. But in some ancient texts, there are descriptions of devices that didn't just point. They floated, aligned with invisible lines across the land. They called them dragon lines, ley lines, currents of the earth, and those who understood them could navigate without stars, could feel direction, not just measure it. Perhaps they didn't need GPS, because the world itself spoke to them. When oceans were roads, modern thinking tells us oceans divide us. But to the ancients, water was a pathway. Boats were sacred. Sea voyages spiritual. And the world connected. In Polynesia, navigators traveled thousands of miles between islands without compasses or maps. They read the stars, the waves, the flight of birds, the color of water. They arrived precisely again and again. How? They called it wayfinding, a form of deep knowledge not taught in books, but passed from memory to soul, now nearly lost. But for thousands of years, it guided them farther than modern sailors thought possible. The pyramid that watches the ocean on an island in the Azores, far from any major landmass, sits a strange structure. It looks like a pyramid, covered in moss, nearly swallowed by time. Aligned with the stars, some believe it's a natural hill. Others, that it was once a beacon. To ships, to stars, or something else entirely. Azores themselves are a mystery, volcanic, remote. Yet fragments of ancient artifacts have been found there long before the Portuguese arrived. Did someone once live there, pass through? Or was it a waypoint on a route we no longer recognize? The world before the world. There are stories found in every ancient culture of a time when the earth looked different. A time before the flood, before the tilt, before the memory fractured. The Hopis called it the third world. The Hindus, a previous yuga. The Greeks, Atlantis. Always the same arc. A golden age, advanced knowledge, then destruction. Then amnesia. Perhaps these weren't myths. Perhaps they were warnings, and perhaps the maps we find etched in stone, drawn on hides, passed through hands are letters from that world. Sent forward, waiting for someone to listen. When distance was an illusion in the journal, I found sketches of strange routes, curves, spirals, not drawn by coastline, but by magnetic flow. Some believe the ancients traveled not in straight lines, but along energy pathways. Using the Earth's own rhythm, its spin, its breath. Perhaps they understood that space is not just measured in miles, but in resonance, that some places call to each other. That two points can connect, not through speed, but through harmony. The cartographers of silence. As I closed the chapter, a strange thought surfaced. Maybe the ancients didn't map the world just to travel. Maybe they did it to remember. To hold memory in line and curve, to stitch continents into the mind, to ensure the world could never truly be lost, even if shattered. Maps were not just tools. They were keys. To a time before forgetting, to a knowledge we still carry deep in our dreams. In the way some children are born knowing what no one taught them, and in the quiet of night, when the world sleeps, the maps still whisper language that didn't need words. There are silences that speak louder than sound, and messages carried not by ink or voice, but by something deeper, older, still alive beneath our noise. In the ancient world, communication wasn't just speaking. It was feeling, remembering, resonating. Some stories tell of people who could share thoughts without lips. Others speak of symbols that triggered memory just by being seen, and of stones that sang only when held by hands that meant what they felt. This is not poetry. This is forgotten science. A technology of the mind and spirit. The symbols that remembering temples across the world, from Angkor Wat to Chavan to Huantar, strange symbols are etched into stone. Not words, not scripts, but glyphs, geometric, repeating, haunting. No one knows what they mean. Some say they are purely decorative. Others believe they are keys, not to language, but to states of consciousness. Like how a single sound can make your skin tingle, or how a spiral can make you feel as if you've been here before. These symbols don't speak to the ear. They speak to the soul's memory. The machines that read emotion in Bolivia. Near the ruins of Tiwanaku lies the Gate of the Sun. An enormous monolith, covered in intricate, unreadable figures, aligned with celestial events. But some believe it did more than tell time. Legends say that when the right person stood before it, their emotion would be read, and the gate would respond. Not with motion, but with understanding, a kind of emotional scanner, a resonance reader. Could a structure be designed to react to feeling? We build machines that respond to touch, to voice. What if the ancients built machines that responded to intention? The dream speakers in ancient Mesopotamia. There were dream libraries, places where scribes recorded visions. Not just personal dreams, but collective messages. Priests and priestesses would sleep in sacred chambers, enter trance states, and return with knowledge of the future, of healing, of people they'd never met but whose pain they could feel. Was this magic, or a form of non-local communication? Modern quantum physics flirts with the idea that consciousness is not confined to the brain, that thought can travel, that entanglement is not just subatomic but emotional. The ancients didn't flirt with it. They used it. The voices inside the stone. Some say the stones in certain temples speak, not in words, but in tone, in vibration. Touch them, and you feel it. Not in your fingers, but in your chest. A subtle hum. A memory not your own. At Sacsayhuaman, the stones fit so tightly that no mortar is needed. But that's not the strangest part. Some emit frequency when struck. Tones. Music. They call them singing stones. Were they placed like this on purpose? To form a song only the earth can hear? Were they a language made of silence? When minds were tuned in many tribes, the shaman did not need to speak. He simply entered the circle, breathed, and everyone understood. Children didn't learn by lecture. They absorbed knowledge through rhythm, movement, presence. In Egypt, the temple initiates would train in silence for years, until their inner voice was clearer than their outer one. In Tibet, monks chant in harmonic overtones, producing two notes at once, not to perform, but to open doors inside the listener. These were not performances, they were tools. To align mind with mind, to bypass the filter of language, to return to the original communication, knowing, the memory that activates without teaching. Certain symbols recur across civilizations. The spiral, the eye, the tree, the serpent. No matter where, no matter when. It's as if these forms are archetypes not invented, but discovered, like stars or elements. They are stored inside us. And when we see them, we remember something we never learned, but always knew. This isn't coincidence. It's evidence of a shared field, a collective memory the ancients accessed freely, and we still do, when we dream, when we fall in love, when we grieve without words. That is the language, the lost frequency. Modern science knows that brain waves change with frequency. Alpha for calm, theta for meditation, delta for sleep. Ancient temples were built to tune those frequencies. They didn't just echo sound. They shaped mind. A chant in one chamber could induce visions. A bell in another could stop pain, not superstition. Designed. The ancients weren't guessing. They were conducting an orchestra of mind and matter, and they knew the most powerful language is the one you feel but cannot explain. In the stillness, it speaks that night. I stopped trying to read the journal. I closed my eyes, and in the darkness, I felt something stir. A pressure, a presence, a conversation without sound. Not from outside, from within. A voice that wasn't mine, but knew my name. It said nothing, but I understood, and maybe that's the point. Some languages can only be heard when the world goes quiet enough to let the old words return. The doors that weren't built to open with hands. Not all doors have hinges. Not all gateways need keys. Some are passed through in silence, others with intention. And some open not into rooms, but into states of being. The ancients spoke often of portals, not as science fiction, but as sacred technology. They did not call them stargates. They called them mirrors, temples, wombs, veils. To cross them was not to travel in space, but to step beyond the veil of perception. And return changed. The mirror that wasn't glass in the heart of ancient Mesoamerica, in temples lined with jaguar stones and obsidian, the shamans gazed into polished black mirrors. Not to see themselves, but to see beyond. These obsidian mirrors weren't decorations. They were tools, portals, windows into non-ordinary reality. The priest would fast, chant, still the body, and when the time was right, the reflection would vanish, and a vision would begin. No electronics, no wires. Just a mind calm enough to receive. The body that could leave itself in Egypt. The term Bayo described the part of the soul that could travel. It was often drawn as a bird with a human face, leaving the body during dreams or death. The Kogi people of Colombia still speak of the Aluna, the invisible world behind this one, more real than ours. In Tibetan Buddhism, advanced monks practice dream yoga, a technology of consciousness where dreams are consciously navigated, used for insight and transformation. These weren't metaphors. They were disciplines, refined over generations, handed down not through books, but through direct transmission, practiced in caves, on mountaintops, in the darkness of the self. When the pineal was the compass, nearly every ancient culture had a symbol for the third eye. Egyptians drew the eye of Horus with mathematical precision, its parts matching the regions of the human brain. Hindus adorned the forehead with a bindi marking the Ajna chakra, the seat of intuition. The pineal gland, small and light-sensitive, sits at the center of the brain. Modern science calls it a relic. The ancients called it a gateway, stimulated by darkness, by vibration, by breath. It was believed to release visions, dreams, higher awareness. And perhaps connection. To what? They never said, because once you cross the door, you no longer need the question. Temples that breathed dimensions. Some temples weren't just buildings. They were machines of awareness. Built not only with stone, but with sound, light, geometry. The Great Pyramid, Chavan de Huantar, Borobudur, their corridors narrow, their chambers vibrating at certain frequencies, their altars aligned with star gates. You don't visit these places. You enter them. Like a dream, like a breath. And some say, when the resonance is right, the air folds, the veil lifts, and the soul remembers how to walk without feet. The stargazers who didn't look up. Some ancient astronomers didn't use telescopes. They used the body. They meditated, chanted, drummed in rhythm with heartbeat and sky. And claimed they could see not just stars, but the movement of time itself. The Dogon people knew of Sirius B, an invisible star. The Vedas spoke of planetary cycles too long to measure without a modern lens. And Aboriginal Australians traced songlines, vibrational paths across the land encoded with stellar knowledge. They didn't need machines. They were the machines tuned to the cosmos, carriers of maps etched not on parchment, but in DNA, dreams, and drumbeats. The memory of the soul's return. Every ancient culture spoke of reincarnation, but not as belief, as structure. The Tibetans mapped the bardo, the space between lives. The Greeks spoke of the Lethe, the river of forgetting. The Egyptians weighed the heart against a feather. These weren't stories. They were manuals, technologies of transition, instructions for the soul. Modern science can't follow them, because it doesn't accept the premise that consciousness is not created by the brain, but uses it. And can leave it. Like a driver stepping out of a car. The engineers of unseen worlds, the shamans, monks, and mystics of the past were not naive. They were engineers of attention, of states, of frequency. They mapped how to leave the body, how to navigate inner realms, how to return with gifts, insight, and healing. Some called it astral projection. Others called it soul travel, but it wasn't escape. It was exploration. Of layers within layers, of dimensions that curl inside this one, where time bends, where identity blurs, where knowledge is felt. Not taught. The mirrors that still wait. I closed the journal gently, but its weight lingered. Not in my hands, in my chest, in the space behind the eyes. I felt as though I'd walked through something, though I hadn't moved. As if a door opened, not in the room, but in me. The ancients didn't just look outward. They looked in, deeper than thought, deeper than fear. And what they found wasn't fantasy, wasn't metaphor. It was the map to everything we pretend we've forgotten. The minds that molded matter. Most technology begins with a tool, a lever, a wheel, a spark. But what if the oldest technologies began somewhere else? Not in the hand, but in the mind. The ancients often spoke of reality as something malleable, a field, a dream, a mirror that bent when the soul was clear. They didn't wait for machines to shape the world. They used consciousness. And though we call it mysticism now, perhaps it was simply a technology we can no longer measure. The temples that built belief in ancient Java. The temple of Borobudur rises like a mountain of stillness. Each level represents a stage of awakening. Not metaphorically, physically. Pilgrims walk in silence, circumambulating the structure, rising step by step, breathing in mantras carved in stone. By the time they reach the top, their heartbeats have synchronized. Their minds are stilled. Their sense of self shifted. The temple doesn't teach. It transforms. It is not just a building. It is a machine of mind-state engineering, and it was built without blueprints, only with knowing. The shape that holds meaning. Sacred geometry is not decoration. It is instruction. The Sri Yantra, a series of intersecting triangles, has ratios so precise that drawing it without aid is nearly impossible. And yet, it predates modern geometry. It appears in sand, stone, metal. It is said to represent the creation of reality itself. To look at it, truly look, is to feel the pull of order, symmetry, unfolding. In Egypt, in the flower of life, in Greece with Platonic solids, in cathedrals with the golden ratio. They knew shapes weren't neutral. They were containers of intent, of vibration, of command. The word that moves reality in the beginning was the word. So say the texts, not because language is speech, but because sound is structure. The ancient Hebrews used letters as tools, each one tied to number, force, frequency. In India, Sanskrit mantras are believed to encode cosmic laws, not poetry, not religion, but code, runes, instructions. In Tibet, monks chant seed syllables, one per chakra. To say them is to shift the body, to awaken systems. To vibrate the world into place. Modern physics now flirts with string theory, where vibration is the root of all matter. The ancients already knew. They sang the world. The magic of directed attention. There's a power we underestimate. We use it every day, but without discipline. Attention. The ancients trained it like a blade, used it like a brush, focused it like a lens. Some schools taught that if a sage held an image in mind with total presence, that image would begin to shape the outer world. Not instantly, but inevitably. They practiced it with care, because they believed where attention goes, energy flows. And where energy flows, reality grows. Today we call it manifestation, but they called it responsibility. Because what you imagine becomes alive. The cities that thought themselves into being in parts of the Andes. Some elders speak of ancient villages built not by stone tools, but by collective dreaming. Each night, the people would enter dream state together, holding the same image, feeling the same future. And when the time came, they built faster, stronger, in harmony. The walls still stand, Not because the stone is better, but because the will that placed them was unified. We think of teamwork as organization. They thought of it as shared reality creation. The technology wasn't in tools. It was in coherence. The eyes that shaped matter in Japan. The concept of kododama means the spirit of words. To speak a word with pure intent is to charge the air. In Masaru Emoto's water experiments, different words change the structure of frozen water. Crystals, love, hate, peace. Beautiful, chaotic, sharp. And if words can do that to water, imagine what thoughts can do to flesh, to places, to destiny. The ancients didn't imagine this. They used it. The statues that woke in some temples, statues weren't passive. They were activated. Not with switches, with ceremony, with presence. The priests would chant, circle the statue, paint its eyes last believing it would wake. Then, afterward, the room would change, not visibly, but undeniably. As if the air became aware. Some called it superstition, but others felt the heat, the heartbeat, the pressure in the chest. A shift. As if intention had filled the space. And stayed. The reality that listens. Perhaps we don't shape reality by force, but by relationship. Not by control, but by invitation. The ancients didn't yell at the world. They danced with it. Every movement was a message. Every ritual, a reminder. Every altar, a signal. I am listening. I am aware. I am willing to shape with love, not fear. They believed the universe is not a machine, but a being. A field, a mirror, and it responds. To thought, to emotion, to truth. The power we still carry. I close the journal once more, not with answers, but with awe. The world is not waiting for us to build better machines. It is waiting for us to remember how to think with clarity, to feel with coherence, to imagine with precision. The real technology was never outside. It was always within, still humming, still listening, still shaping. Even now, as you drift into sleep, your mind creates, tunes, builds, and maybe the ancients are smiling. Not from the past, but from inside the blueprint you still carry. What was lost was never gone. We speak of lost technologies as if they are missing pieces of a puzzle. Scattered tools, ruins buried in sand, maps faded by time. But perhaps they are not lost. Perhaps they are waiting. Not beneath the earth, but within us. Every temple, every carving, every whisper of sound that lifted stone was not just a marvel of structure. It was a message, a blueprint, for something not built with hands, but with awareness. The real machines were people. Throughout this journey, we've seen the wonders. Stone moved without cranes, skulls healed with no steel, stars mapped with no lenses, structures that sing, symbols that remember. But again and again, the true pattern emerges. The ancients were the instruments, their breath tuned, their focus sharp, their communities aligned, their rituals rhythm, their buildings mirrors. They didn't outsource their power. They became it. The earth was the first laboratory. We now build labs underground. We split atoms and smash particles. But the ancients used the earth itself. Mountains became observatories. Caves became dream chambers. Water carried resonance. Fire whispered stories. They listened to the hum of minerals, to the wind as it passed through stone, to the stars when they blinked in rhythms. They didn't try to conquer nature. They danced with it, spoke to it, learned its names. And in return, nature revealed her secrets. The technology of the invisible. What has truly been lost is not a device, not a machine, not a recipe. It is the way of seeing. The ancients knew that the most powerful forces were the ones you couldn't hold, couldn't weigh, couldn't sell. Intention, resonance, belief, coherence. They knew that everything built in. The outer world was only a reflection of the inner. So they trained the inner first. Before the first brick, Before the first map. The true construction site was always consciousness, the silence that carried knowledge. Not all records were books. Some were rituals, chants, gestures, paths walked by bare feet for centuries until the land remembered. Some were dreams passed down in lineages, initiations, shared breath, stories told at the fire not to entertain, but to transmit frequencies. And when those lineages were broken, when the fires went cold, we thought the knowledge was lost, but it grew. A single quotes to it simply moved inward, into seed, into silence, into soul. The echo in you. As I closed the final page of the journal, I realized the journey had never really been about the past. It had been a mirror, the stones that remember, so do we. The maps that shouldn't exist, so do our dreams. The symbols that awaken something, so does your reflection when you truly look into it. You don't need ruins to find ancient technology. You carry it. In your ability to focus, to feel, to remember without words, to shape without force, to hear what's never been spoken, what the ancients hoped we'd find. Maybe they knew we'd forget, that we'd get loud, fast, hungry for machines and metal. Maybe that's why they left. US clues, in stone, in chant, in stars. Not to return to the past, but to awaken the part of us that never left it, the part that builds temples of stillness, that heals with breath, that listens until the world speaks back. The final message: you are not separate from the wonders you seek. You are not too late. You are not too small. The lost technologies, they were never really gone. They live in the silence you avoid, in the dreams you dismiss, in the awe you feel when you stop trying to understand and start remembering. So, tonight, as the world falls quiet and your thoughts soften like rain, let yourself drift not into sleep, but into return. To the memory that pulses in your cells, to the technologies made of breath, sound, and soul, to the ancient truth that you are the machine, you are the temple, you are the key,